All right, we're back with another edition of the Waiting for Next Year podcast. I'm Josh Poloha. This time, we're not talking Browns. We're actually talking Ohio State Buckeyes, and I am joined by 11 Warriors beat reporter for basketball and football, Colin Hass-Hill. I think you used to write for Waiting for Next Year too, right? You're a former WFNY yourself.
Yeah, when I think I was a freshman in college at West Virginia, and then I transferred to Ohio State, and then eventually got involved with the student paper there after a little while, and ended up at 11 Warriors out of college. So I've been here for now. This will be my third season, except this season I won't really be covering it from anywhere but a TV. So things get interesting, huh?
A TV and Zoom, just
I
like
know,
we
right?
imagined in 2020.
Yeah, we had Zoom interviews yesterday and today, and all you do is you just sit in here in my room and wait for guys to come in over a 2.5 hour period, and I guess that's just what the future is.
Craziness, it really is. But all right, we'll get right into it. Ohio State, they struggled early on against Nebraska. I think it was 14-14, but then after that 14-14, it was a huge blowout. The passing attack looks really good, led by Justin Fields. The offensive line looks good. Wide receivers look really good, and they have plenty of talent. But they struggled. They seem to struggle in the run game. Their running backs. Do you have anything to say about the struggles
Yeah,
there?
I think it's really interesting because you know I don't think I think a lot of this is just what your expectation was. And I think if you were expecting someone to come in like J.K. Dobbins and run like he did, or you were expecting the next Ezekiel Elliott, then I just don't think you were living in reality. Because what they have is Trey Sermon, who was good at Oklahoma, but he was injured, and he was never the guy who was a 1,500-yard back or something like that. He never even had 1,000 in the season. So like you knew he had some talent, but you didn't know exactly what you're going to get out of him. And then the same thing with Master Teague, where I think early last season, people were just really intrigued by him. And I remember after the first game, you had some people wondering, should Master T get more carries than JK? Should it be a 50-50 split? Obviously, as that year progressed, you saw that those conversations made no sense, to put it bluntly. And, when you have Master Teague, I think, he's shown impressiveness in spurts, but also against some of the better opponents that he has played. He hasn't really had any standout performances yet. Combined with the uncertainty with Trey Sermon, I think when you walk into the season, if you were expecting a certain level, then yeah, you were probably disappointed. But I think honestly, I just wasn't too surprised by where the running game is right now, because you're working in those two backs. I don't really know if I like the way that they rotate, and I don't necessarily think that's going to change. I think that a lot of it is not going to be situational. It's just going to be one guy has a series and the next guy's the next series, and they'll go like that. But I think eventually they will get to the point where they have a better running game. But honestly, I mean it's game one. You don't really have to have the world's greatest running game in the world when you have Justin Fields throwing passes to Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. And I
Exactly.
also think, yeah, and I also think the offensive line will play better as the year progresses. And I also don't think you're going to see teams, sell out and defend the run, sort of like Nebraska did at points early in the game. So I think all that combined, like I understand why I think some people were fretting over certain aspects of it, especially the run game. But I was perfectly fine with this first game. I think you saw a lot of positives. And there wasn't one thing I said like this is a glaring concern. I think there are some things that if Ohio State is going to win a championship, they need to improve on. But I'm not someone who came out of that game and thought they've got issues up and down the roster, which I'm honestly was a little surprised at some of the pessimism that I saw.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they scored 52 points, so me nitpicking the offenses. I mean, it is what it is when you have Justin Fields and a whole bunch of talent. Speaking of Justin Fields, he ran the ball 15 times. I'm assuming Ryan Day probably doesn't like that, especially this early on in the season. But it also seemed like Nebraska was, if it was like a read option, they would just go after the running back and force Fields to keep the ball himself. That way, get him hit a little bit. I'm assuming Day will probably change that up a little bit. That way, Fields is at least not getting hit, at least so early on. Keep him fresh for later in the season.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure that you're going to see a lot different. I think that when you look at the pure numbers and you see the 16 carries by Justin Fields, you think, that might be a little high. And I think that's reasonable to think because we all know, like, what's the one thing that is going to keep Ohio State back from a championship? Like, you have all these other little things. Like, what if the defense doesn't play up to par? What if the running game, isn't great? What if it's just average? But the real thing is, like, if you lose Justin Fields, it's hard to imagine this team winning a national championship. But the caveat to that is what makes Justin Fields special is his ability to just extend plays. And I think if you go back and you look at his 16 rushes, 3 of those were sacks, 10 of those were scrambles, and 3 of those were designed runs. So I think if you just think like how is 3 designed runs too many? I don't think anyone would say that. I think if you want to nitpick the carries, I think you can probably say maybe he can throw it away or look downfield a little bit more. But honestly, I just think that that's sort of what Justin Fields is, and it's a little scary if you're in for Ohio State to watch him run the ball that often. But I also think like that is Justin Fields doesn't score that 18-yard rush if he's not this kind of Justin Fields who's willing to take the risk, willing to run like that. So I think it's just a give and take with him. And when Ryan Day and Justin Fields both talked this week, like to me, it's pretty clear that they want to protect him, they want to keep him safe. But Justin Fields is Justin Fields, and you're not going to change that just to keep him safe.
I'm not going to compare the two, but it's just like JT Barrett when he was running the ball so much, but it's just who he is. I mean, you live and die off the talent that they are, and Justin Fields is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. So whatever he wants to do, whatever he can do to make plays, he's going to do it.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're going to see that throughout the season. At some point, I just think everything opens up on the offense because of Justin Fields. Like we talked about the running game probably not being where it needs to be for Ohio State to win a national championship in week 1. But I can't imagine that teams are going to defend the run and put as many resources into defending the run as much as Nebraska did in week 1. I think that'll be something that changes. And I think that, when Justin Fields gets out and escapes the pocket like that, like teams know they have to account for him, and that'll open up the run game. Everything on offense just stems from what Justin can do. And that's the exciting part about, when he is a Buckeye.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it really is fun to watch. He can literally do anything and everything. He can throw the ball 60 yards downfield. He can run the ball for a 100-yard touchdown. On with throwing the ball, though, instead of nitpicking the run game. Does Ohio State have the best group of wide receivers in the country? I mean, I guess you can say Alabama, but Garrett Wilson. I mean, the list goes on. Chris Olave. I know I forget who it was. I'm not going to call out any names, but one beat reporter said that Ohio State lacks depth at wide receiver, and I think it is the complete opposite. They have so much talent out wide. And when you have Justin Fields throwing you the ball, it's just like find the open guy and he'll make a play for you.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Like, a few months ago, I was someone who, you look at what they have, and what they really have is they got 2 guys in Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, who I think you just know are stars. Like Chris Olave is who Chris Olave is. He is a really, really good player. He has great chemistry with Justin Fields. He's going to be a downfield threat. He's someone who's impressive. And I think that you knew sort of Garrett Wilson was going to take that next step, especially when he moves into the slot and he's a little bit more versatile with where he lines up. But I'll be honest, like even, a few months ago, I did wonder, what exactly do we expect from guys early in their career? Because I think that sometimes, even at Ohio State, where they bring in the best of the best in terms of talent, sometimes we get a little ahead of ourselves just in general about, what to expect from guys in their first year. I mean, you think of that 2018 defense, which was terrible. A lot of those guys were then starters on the 2019 defense, which I'd make an argument was, I think, might have been the best defense in Ohio State history. So I think a lot of it is just development. And I did wonder early on, like, are these guys going to be the kind of guys who are going to walk in the door and be really good right away? Or are they going to need a little bit more time? And I think, as we got closer to the season, you just sort of started to hear constant, talk about like that the talent of these guys is real, and they're understanding the game more so than most freshmen. I think you saw what Jackson Smith and Jigba and Julian Fleming can do in that first game. And I think if you look at what these younger guys have combined with, what Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave offer, it is an extremely talented receiving room. And I'm interested to see how that thing develops as the year progresses.
For sure. I mean, yeah, like I said, we can nitpick the run game all we want, but when you have Justin Fields and that group of wide receivers, I mean, you can throw any of them in there besides Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, who dominated, and I feel like it would still be a really good passing game no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so on from that 52-14 drubbing of Nebraska, let's talk Penn State. Top 20 showdown in Happy Valley. Unfortunately, due to COVID, no fans allowed. It's usually a whiteout. It's usually a really good, a good environment for the home team, a rough environment for the away team, as Ohio State has experienced. Urban Meyer's went as far as saying that it's a 7 to 10 point difference just from home field advantage with the whiteout, and now they have no fans there. Do you think that's going to play a really big role, or?
It's hard. It's hard to know exactly. It really is. I think that it'll play some role. I think 7 to 10 might be a little bit aggressive. Yeah. I mean, you hear the players talk, and I think every single player who spoke to the media yesterday and today was asked about it, and a lot of them like they miss it. Like they love that road environment. They love when the fans are talking to them. So I think even just the little things like that will be missed. I mean, it's basically you're playing a practice, except you're in Pennsylvania instead of Ohio. So I think that,
Yep.
yeah, that's absolutely going to be different. Now, how much does that impact the game? I don't know that it impacts it a ton once they get started. I'm sure that there are little, minor areas where it can be impactful while they play, whether it be timing up blitzes or need to change, the snap count, stuff like that. But in general, I think that I don't think that'll have a huge issue once the game gets started. I just think it's more so a talking point, which is fair because for us watching the game, it's going to be very different than it is when we are normally watching it.
Absolutely. It is weird. Just you can hear a lot more. I mean, they still have like the pipes and sound, but it just seems like you can hear a lot more than I don't know. It's just an empty stadium, just so weird, especially college football stadiums that are meant to hold over 100,000 people like Ohio State and Penn State. Um, the Nittany Lions just came off of a really, really tough loss against Indiana. They were a top 10 team, lost in overtime on a questionable play. It could go either way. We won't talk about that. They're number 18 now, or number 17 in the coaches poll. Are they still one of the top teams in the Big Ten, even after losing to IU to start the season?
Yeah, I think they are. I think they're talented enough, and I think that I think they're good enough on both sides of the ball that they are. And if you look up and down Ohio State's schedule in the regular season, it's not exactly teaming with teams that you're like that you think are equal to Ohio State. I mean, you probably don't think any are equal to Ohio State. You look for like who are the contenders that are good enough that if they put together a good day, if they put together a great game plan, then they can keep it close or beat Ohio State. And yeah, I still think Penn State fits into that category. I don't think just the devastating loss that they had to Indiana takes them out of that. I think if you look on both sides of the ball, that there are enough areas that when I think about Ohio State, like you know they're not concerns, but they're things that people have to prove. Like if I look at, what does Penn State's defense do really well? Like it gets after quarterbacks, it pass rushes. And I think that, Nicholas Petit Frere, I thought he had an awesome week one. What does he do week two in the biggest game of his life? I think that that's something that you have to, question. I think if you look at what Nebraska did fairly well in offense, they got the quarterback out there. They ran the quarterback pretty well. I think that Nebraska's tight ends had a couple catches that Penn State definitely looks at and wonders if they can replicate with Pat Fryermuth. I think there's enough. There are enough areas on both sides of the ball that you just have to wonder about, and you want to see Ohio State prove what it can do in certain areas. That Penn State definitely can beat Ohio State. I'm going to pick the Buckeyes, but I wouldn't wake up on Sunday morning and think like I cannot believe Ohio State lost this one. Penn State's still a good team. Just because they lost to Indiana doesn't completely rule that out for me.
For sure. I guess along those talking points, if Penn State wants to beat Ohio State, who are some like big names that we should watch? I think aren't they on their fourth running back now? I think I saw somewhere that they're on their fourth running back due to injuries and everything already.
Yeah, I mean, Journey Brown was someone who people wondered, like, could he, and with big year, like, is he a dark horse Heisman candidate? Which I think is probably a little bit aggressive, but like some people thought that, and he's not going to play. He's out for the year. Noah Kane is another running back who at one point Ohio State was recruiting hard. He's not going to play. He's out. So yeah, I mean, their running back is going to be Devin Ford, and that was going to be a really deep, really talented position, one of the most talented positions in the Big Ten, and now they're down to the one guy that they trust there. Ricky Slade was another guy who transferred to Old Dominion in the offseason. So it was once a really deep, talented room. Devin Ford's still a good running back, but it's a little different there. So if I look around, like I do wonder about what Sean Clifford can do this game against Ohio State. He's never been someone who I've been incredibly impressed by, but also he's a guy who can beat you on the ground. I think that's something that Ohio State showed it could be susceptible to in week one. Pat Freiermuth last year, I thought Pete Werner did a really good job on him at Sam, but now that Pete Werner's playing Will, which is an inside linebacker spot, he's not going to be, unless they move him back for one game, he's not going to be on Pat Freiermuth that much. And then I wonder, like, who is the guy who's going to guard Pat Freiermuth, who's this 6'5", 250-pounder? I don't have a great answer. Like, I don't really think that they would trust Baron Browning or Justin Hilliard to do that full time. But I also think like a guy like Josh Proctor is interesting. He's much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
He's got multiple inches and a lot of pounds. So I'm not sure who the answer is there. That's definitely something I would watch. And then the other side of the ball, like Jason Owe could be a first-round pick. Shaka Toney was Penn State's best player on both sides of the ball at defensive end last week. So I think that there are certainly some guys who I would just pay attention to.
For sure. And I mean, no matter who the talent is, James Franklin-led teams seem to always play Ohio State tough, whether it's home or away, whether it's fans, no fans.
Yeah, some of the best games recently have been Penn State games.
For sure. And I know they said it's not a rivalry. And the Penn State player today said, no, their rival's Michigan, which makes sense. But I mean, of late, I think Ohio State's been a bigger rivalry than Penn State. Or Ohio State's been a bigger rivalry for Penn State than it has for Michigan, just because of how close the games are and back and forth.
Yeah, it's tough to then you have to just figure out like what's a rivalry, because is it a rivalry just to play close games, or do you have to have some juice going into it on both sides? And I don't think a lot of Ohio State fans view it as a rivalry, but they've absolutely played a closer game than Michigan in recent years. That's just indisputable.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's all I have for Ohio State Penn State. I don't really. How about this? Predictions for this weekend. Who will be the best offensive player for Ohio State? Not named Justin Fields.
You have to put not named Justin Fields every single time, because I was thinking like, when is a week going to happen that I'm not going to pick Justin Fields to be the best player? And like,
true.
That's going to happen. So Justin Fields will be my MVP every single week. Outside of him, this offense is just in a place where Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are the two other guys who I trust most to produce in a big way. So, I mean, it would be a combination of them. And if you're going to make me pick one after watching week one, I'll just go with Garrett Wilson, just because I think that Garrett Wilson is going to lead the team in catches. I think he's going to be, a threat to, catch for 100 yards every game. And I'll give you a little tidbit, because I have a story that I'll probably drop on Friday. I thought this was fun. I talked to his high school basketball coach, and Garrett Wilson was a great high school basketball player, like really, really good. In that, I asked his coach, were there any schools that asked like, who's that guy? And he said, yeah, Butler did. And it was the year after Chris Holtman, but they had an assistant coach who came down to see someone else, and they're like, who's this Garrett Wilson guy? And it turns out, I talked to the assistant earlier today, and he said like he thought that Garrett Wilson was just Kamar Baldwin 2.0. Kamar Baldwin was a first team All Big East guard. Like that's what they thought Garrett Wilson was in basketball. So he has translated those skills over to football, and I have full confidence that for the next 2 years before he goes off and becomes a first round pick, that he is going to continue to make acrobatic catches and go for 100 yards most games.
Yeah, I feel like him and Fields connecting for 100 yards is just like one of those, oh, yeah, that's for sure going to happen every game sort of stats.
Yeah, and it's only happened once because Garrett wasn't in this role last year. But I just, the way that he plays and the way that they like to use him, which is all over the field, I mean, I fully expect that he's going to lead them in catches. And I picked Olave to lead him in yards, but, I mean, the way that they targeted Garrett down the field, he might lead him in yards and catches.
And speaking of Chris Olave, I know he got banged up pretty bad against Nebraska, but Ryan Day has been saying that he's sort of doing well this week. Are we expecting him to play on Saturday night?
think Garrett Wilson, actually, funny enough, was the guy who had said that, yeah, Garrett's doing well and he thinks he'll play. Ryan Day was a little bit more coy. So I think that he will play. I don't know that we'll all find that out for sure together on Friday morning.
Friday morning. All right. One last prediction. I don't want to steal it from 11 Warriors because you're going to have your predictions on there Friday. I won't ask you the score. How about margin of victory for Ohio State? Because I know you're going to pick Ohio State to win.
I actually was just scrolling back in my messages with Dan Hope, who writes the game preview and gets everybody's prediction and puts them all together for this whole staff predictions. I wanted to see what I actually had, and it was 49-27 because I just feel confident in this team.
Wow.
And I mean a 22-point victory, which I think is probably a little bit aggressive. But I think that this offense is going to score with everybody. I mean, I think this offense, until it reaches the Clemson, Alabamas of the world, I just think they're going to be at that 49-point mark every single time. I think that when you throw the ball the way they do, when Justin Fields, can get out on the ground the way he does, I think that they're going to be solid. My one caveat there is I don't feel like I learned a lot about this defense in week 1. I think there's a lot about this defense that I don't really know about yet. And I think there are a lot of people who are wondering about, defending the run and defending the quarterback run. I don't have a great grasp on where they are at all 3 levels. I think that the pass rush probably left a little bit to be desired. I also wonder, if when you're looking at Nebraska's passing offense, it's not exactly something that you feel like you have to, you don't have to unleash Chase Young. Like you're not that worried about them dicing you up down the field. So I think that we don't know a ton about Ohio State's defensive backs and coverage. We don't know a ton about Ohio State's pass rush. I think the linebackers played fine. I mean, Tough Borland is who Tough Borland is. You know who he is. Like, he's a solid player. I think the people who don't like him just watch the one play every game that he looks very slow on, which is fair. But also, I think you saw in the first game, like, he made a lot of decent plays. He made a lot of effort plays. He was always in the right place. I think Pete Warner had a fine first game. I just think that that in totality, when I say they're going to give up 27 points, is a little bit optimistic to me about this defense. And I guess that's because I feel like this defensive backfield is pretty solid. I think that the linebackers will play better. And I think we just didn't really get a great grasp on what this pass rush is. And I do think with all 5 guys at defensive end that they have, I think they're going to be okay.
For sure. Like you said, I think there's more questions than answers on defense. And the game against Nebraska didn't really answer anything because I think it was more of like a feel-out game where you let guys play, see what they can do. I mean, it's Nebraska, let's be honest. It wasn't supposed to be a close game. They knew it wasn't going to be a close game. So it was more about getting guys playing time, seeing what's going on. And then maybe this weekend against Penn State, they'll kind of start getting in place of who's going to play the most and stuff like that. But who knows? I mean, if it's not Penn State this weekend, it might not be until Michigan, the final week of the regular season, honestly, with looking at the schedule, looking ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. I think the one thing I would say too that we'll learn about is how they match personnel, because they played a fairly vanilla defense in week 1, and I don't necessarily, the way they talked in the offseason made me think that they won't do that in week 2, but they could have just been lying. That's what college football coaches do.
Yeah, I'd say coaches never lie. All right, Colin, thank you for joining us. Catch him over at 11 Warriors. He writes a lot of good stuff. I know he does podcasts and everything over there. So go read the stuff over at 11warriors.com. And thanks for joining us again, Colin.
Absolutely, anytime.